He sits motionless in a glass box. Fluorescent lights hum overhead. Fake vines droop from plastic trees, dust coating their faded green. Children press sticky fingers against the glass, giggling. But the orangutan doesn't look up. His name is Rimbo. He's lived inside the shopping mall cage for 13 years. A hollow concrete enclosure dressed to resemble the jungle. That was Rimbo's entire world. Beneath the sound of food court music and security announcements, his slow footsteps echo every day on the same synthetic ground. He no longer reacts to people, no longer shows signs of curiosity or aggression. His spirit is quiet, unnaturally so. This is not calm, this is defeat. Shoppers come and go. Some stop for a selfie, others tilt their heads and say, "Poor thing," before moving on to buy shoes. No one stays long. Because the longer you look into Rimbo's eyes, the harder it is to pretend this is normal. But one person does stay. A 22-year-old biology student named Leah has just started interning at the mall's Ecodome attraction. She thought she'd be helping with school tours, maybe handing out brochures about conservation. She never imagined her first assignment would be cleaning glass from the inside, while an orangutan silently watched her. That first day she dropped her squeegee when he approached. Not with aggression, not with excitement, just curiosity. Barely a spark, but enough to startle her. Rimbo stood a few feet away, eyes fixed on her hands. When she backed away, he mirrored her movement exactly, not like an animal sizing her up, like someone testing trust. The supervisor laughed. "He likes you," she said. "Just don't touch the glass. He hates that." But Leah couldn't laugh. Because as she stared into Rimbo's face, she didn't see a wild animal. She saw something closer to a prisoner, trapped in a place he was never meant to be. And what unsettled her most was how quiet it all was. Later that night, Leah went home and researched Rimbo's story. He was born in the wilds of Borneo, captured as a baby during an illegal deforestation operation, then sold to a private wildlife collector. From there, he was donated to the mall as a tourist attraction when he was just 5 years old. That was over a decade ago. He hadn't touched real soil or climbed a living tree in 4,800 days. She sat in the dark, staring at the screen. Images of orangutans in the wild flashed in her browser, swinging, laughing, building nests. Then she clicked on Rimbo's enclosure live stream again. He was sitting in the same corner, unmoving, alone. The next morning, Leah brought her phone to work and began filming. Nothing dramatic at first, just Rimbo pacing, Rimbo sitting, Rimbo staring. But the way he avoided looking at his own reflection in the glass, it haunted her. She started uploading short clips to social media. People responded, fast. "This can't be legal. Why isn't anyone doing something?" I cried watching this. The comments multiplied. Shares turned into reposts. Animal rights pages picked it up. By the end of the week, one of Leah's clips, of Rimbo reaching for a plastic leaf, then letting it fall from his hand, had been viewed over 2 million times. But the moment that changed everything came 2 days later. Leah entered the enclosure early before opening hours to deliver breakfast. Rimbo was already standing near the glass. She paused, tray in hand, as he slowly moved forward. Their eyes met, not briefly, but deeply. And then, in a gesture no one expected, Rimbo pressed his palm to the glass. Motionless. Waiting. Leah froze. Her hand trembled as she reached forward and placed her own palm opposite his. The cold between them was thin. But in that moment, it felt like the weight of the world. She snapped a photo. Later, that image would become the symbol of a global outcry. But for now, Leah lowered her hand, blinked away tears, and whispered just one word. Soon. The image of Rimbo pressing his hand to the glass was more than a photo. It was a mirror that forced the world to look at what it had ignored. Within a single day, It swept across every platform: Instagram, TikTok, X, Facebook. Animal rights influencers reposted it with captions like, "This is not enrichment. This is imprisonment." Celebrities reshared it with one-word pleas: unacceptable. Within 72 hours, the hashtag number #FreeRimbo trended globally, and behind the scenes, chaos erupted. The shopping mall's management team called emergency meetings. The PR director drafted cold press statements about safety protocols and regulatory compliance. Their story? Rimbo has lived comfortably under expert care for over a decade. But Leah's footage said otherwise. In one clip, Rimbo repeatedly presses his head against the same corner of the glass, not once, not twice, but 17 times in under an hour. In another, he sits under a flickering light that takes 3 days to be replaced. The mall insisted this was normal. The public did not agree. People began gathering outside the building. At first it was 5 or 6 protesters. By the weekend it was hundreds. They brought megaphones, banners, and children. One sign read, "He sees you. Can you see him?" Another simply showed Rimbo's face with the word, "Enough." Inside, Rimbo sat in his enclosure, unaware of the storm building for him. Or maybe not, because that's when he stopped eating. The keepers noticed 2 days later. They chalked it up to stress. But Leah, still watching every hour of the live stream from her bedroom, knew better. His posture had changed. His pacing stopped. He didn't curl into his corner. He slumped. Every day his food tray remained full. The sanctuary team started calling. The Borneo Wildlife Refuge, Save the Orangutan Alliance, even Jane Goodall's organization offered help. They were ready. They had space. They had transport. But the mall wouldn't budge. "Ownership is unclear," said one lawyer. "He's part of a long-term contract," said another. There were whispers of Rimbo being considered mall property under obscure animal entertainment laws. The resistance wasn't about safety. It was about liability, about image, about power. Meanwhile, Leah was suspended from her internship. She received threatening letters claiming she violated privacy agreements. But something inside her had changed, and no threat could compete with what she saw in Rimbo's eyes. She launched a petition, "Get Rimbo Out," and shared a raw, emotional video explaining everything. In it, she cried. She showed documents. She read a list of items found inside Rimbo's enclosure: plastic foliage, a broken rubber swing, one dull enrichment toy shaped like a coconut, and a mirror he had cracked and never been given back. The video hit 10 million views in 5 days. By now, journalists had flown in. They requested tours. Most were denied. But secretly, one news crew managed to obtain old internal photos. Rimbo in his crate as a juvenile, surrounded by security guards during a mall promotion, dressed in a Santa hat, forced to wave. Public sentiment flipped from outrage to fury, and yet the mall still stalled, until Rimbo collapsed. It was a Tuesday afternoon when he didn't respond to his keeper's call. They found him lying flat on his side, his breath shallow, his food untouched. He wasn't sedated. He wasn't sick. He had simply stopped trying. That night, under intense legal and public pressure, the mall released a final statement. "We are initiating a compassionate relocation in partnership with licensed wildlife experts." The next morning, a rescue team was deployed, but their internal notes were grim. "Subject is severely underweight, exhibits signs of learned helplessness, unresponsive to stimuli, prognosis uncertain." No one could say for sure if Rimbo would survive the transfer. No one even knew if he wanted to. But the team had no choice. He would leave the glass box behind. The only question was, would his soul come with him? The crate rolled out beneath flickering mall lights. Rimbo didn't fight. He didn't flinch. His arms hung limp, his eyes half closed. A being once built for swinging through canopies now lay silent in a steel box pushed by handlers who couldn't meet his gaze. Leah was there, not as staff, not as a protester, just as herself, the person who had looked into a caged soul and refused to look away. From behind the police barriers, she watched Rimbo disappear down the corridor, the sound of the crowd hushed like a funeral. The ride to the sanctuary took 7 hours. The rescue team monitored him closely, heart rate, oxygen, stress hormones. At one point, the truck hit a bump, and Rimbo shifted, emitting a low vocalization. It wasn't anger, it wasn't fear, it sounded empty. When they arrived, the change in environment was immediate. Instead of food court echoes and security alarms, there were cicadas, wind, rain drumming on real leaves. The air smelled of earth, not disinfectant. The enclosure was open, shaded, wild with tangled vines and muddy paths. But Rimbo didn't step out. He remained in the crate for 2 more hours, crouched and trembling. It wasn't until the sun began to drop below the tree line that he slowly emerged. He didn't explore. He didn't climb. He walked 4 feet to a large root and sat. That's where he stayed. For 9 days, the team of primatologists and caregivers worked around the clock. They offered native fruits, familiar objects, gentle vocalizations. They avoided direct eye contact. They played recordings of wild orangutan calls, hoping to stir something primal in him. But Rimbo barely reacted. He wouldn't touch food unless it was placed directly beside him. He wouldn't look at the other orangutans, a group of rescues nearby that lived semi-wild in the sanctuary. He didn't play, didn't scratch, didn't groom. He simply stared into the forest like he was trying to remember what it was supposed to mean. "His mind is still behind glass," one caregiver whispered. The staff kept journals. Rimbo's log was thin. It read more like a vigil than a record. Day 4, minimal movement, 1 defecation, no vocalizations. Day 6, blank stare, no engagement with enrichment tools, won't respond to mirror. Day 8, sat in same position for 11 hours. Some began to wonder if Rimbo had reached a point beyond repair, not physically, but neurologically. Decades of confinement can break the will in ways unseen on scans. His muscles were intact. His heart was strong. But his behavior reflected something more brutal than trauma: disassociation. Still, they refused to give up. Then came the storm. A massive tropical downpour rolled over the hills, not rare in the region, but powerful. The wind howled through the treetops. Thunder cracked the sky into fragments. Many of the sanctuary's rescues retreated to their shelters, but Rimbo stayed in the open. He didn't flee. He didn't flinch. He looked awake. For the first time since his arrival, he lifted his face toward the sky. Rain pelted his fur. Mud squelched beneath his feet. The sounds weren't piped in. The air wasn't recycled, and Rimbo stood in it all, real, wet, wild, and opened his mouth, letting the water collect on his tongue. It was a small act, but for the team it was seismic. The next morning, a new enrichment plan was launched, but not with toys, with other orangutans. At sunrise, they opened a gate between Rimbo's pen and the nearest troop. The apes hesitated, then a curious young male named Roki slowly approached. No aggression, no dominance, just presence. He sat 10 feet from Rimbo and waited. Rimbo didn't move. The team held their breath. Roki placed a piece of fruit between them, then backed off. Rimbo didn't take it, not yet. But he looked at it, and then, very slightly, he looked at Roki, a shift. Subtle, but unmistakable. In that single glance, Rimbo had made the first move back to connection, back to curiosity, back to life. It began with the mango. On the 11th day, just after dawn, the sanctuary staff placed a few pieces of fruit near Rimbo's usual sitting place. They'd done this before, dozens of times, but this time something was different. Because this time they didn't do it themselves. Tana did. She was a younger female orangutan, gentle, clever, recently rescued from an illegal roadside zoo. She had adapted quickly to sanctuary life, moving fluidly between the trees and forming early bonds with other rescues. But with Rimbo, she was patient. That morning, while the keepers quietly observed from behind a shaded blind, Tana approached slowly. She carried the mango in one hand, paused about 5 feet from Rimbo, and placed it on the ground. Then, without a sound, she sat. Rimbo didn't look at her right away. His body remained still, his eyes on the forest beyond. But the fruit's scent lingered, sweet, earthy, alive. Minutes passed. Then his hand moved, first an inch, then another. No panic, no flinch. Just a slow reach toward the fruit, as if his arm remembered a rhythm his soul had forgotten. He picked it up, turned it over once, then pressed it gently to his lips. He took a bite. The mango juice ran down his chin, a piece of leaf stuck to his wrist. For the first time in weeks, the staff smiled. No one said a word. They didn't need to. This wasn't just nutrition. It was trust. It was a beginning. Over the next few days, Tana returned, sometimes with fruit, sometimes not. She didn't push him, didn't expect a response. She simply shared space, and Rimbo slowly started to respond. On day 14, he followed her. Not far, just from the feeding area to the edge of a shallow stream that bordered the troop's larger enclosure. She crossed easily, swinging across a low-hanging branch. Rimbo hesitated on the bank. The water shimmered. Birds called overhead. He studied the stream like it was an alien world. Then, foot by foot, he stepped in. The water reached his ankles, then his knees. He paused, let it surround him, and for the first time in perhaps a decade, he crossed something that didn't have a floor. On the other side, he climbed a low root, then another, and then he reached up. His arm gripped a branch overhead. His body pulled itself up, slow, awkward. Not the graceful motion of a seasoned wild ape, but it was a climb. It was instinct clawing its way back from extinction. It was flight, rediscovered. The cameras hidden in the canopy recorded everything, footage of Rimbo pulling himself into the trees, of Tana watching nearby, of Rimbo curling his fingers into leaves instead of plastic, pressing his chest to bark instead of glass. By the end of the week, he built his first nest. It was crude, sloppy, a mess of leaves and sticks that barely held together, but it was his. That night, he didn't return to the ground shelter. He stayed in the nest. The moon rose, pale and silent, casting shadows through the canopy. And Rimbo slept among them, for the first time, as part of the jungle. Word spread fast. The world that had cried for Rimbo months earlier now watched in awe. The hashtag resurfaced, but now it was different. Rimbo rises. Documentaries reached out. Wildlife publications ran headlines. The ape who taught us to hope. Fundraisers for the sanctuary tripled. A sculptor in Sweden even began designing a bronze piece of Rimbo climbing, his foot still touching the earth, but his eyes aimed skyward. And then Leah returned. The sanctuary had invited her quietly after seeing Rimbo's progress. She came alone, no cameras, no media, just a woman who once held a phone up to glass and saw a being no one else did. They led her to a shaded viewing platform. Across the enclosure, Rimbo was lounging on a large branch, grooming his arm. Stronger now, more alert. His posture was proud. He looked like he belonged there. Then he saw her. He froze. And so did Leah. He moved toward her, slow and deliberate, climbing down from the tree and walking across the field. The staff stayed back, letting the moment unfold. He stopped a few feet from the platform. His eyes searched hers. There was no fear, no hesitation. And then, without prompting, Rimbo raised his hand. No glass between them this time, just air, just memory, just two souls who had seen each other through the bars and broken them. Leah knelt, lowered her hand, and touched his. No crowd, no roar. Just a quiet, wordless moment between a girl who refused to forget and an animal who had every reason to. The moment Rimbo touched Leah's hand didn't go online. Not because it wasn't recorded, A staff member had captured it on a long lens camera from a respectful distance, but because Leah refused to share it. "This is his," she said, "not the Internet's." And somehow that decision made the moment even more sacred. But while that clip never surfaced, Rimbo's story did. And it swept across the world not as a tale of cruelty anymore, but of resurrection. The media changed their tone. New headlines bloomed like flowers after a monsoon. Orangutan once caged in mall learns to climb again. He was forgotten. Now he's a symbol of hope. The wild remembered him. Wildlife conservation groups used Rimbo's journey to educate on cognitive trauma in primates. International conferences cited his case as proof that rehabilitation wasn't just physical, it was emotional, psychological, and deeply spiritual. And change followed. 2 Southeast Asian shopping malls voluntarily shut down their live animal exhibits, citing Rimbo's story. A government task force in Malaysia launched an investigation into primate trafficking loopholes. In Indonesia, a long-stalled wildlife protection bill finally moved forward, its promotional campaign featuring an image of an orangutan's open hand, reaching toward freedom. Rimbo had become more than a rescue case. He was a ripple, a catalyst. A question echoed through society. If he could forgive us, what will we do next? Back at the sanctuary, Rimbo continued to evolve. He no longer sat apart. He began traveling with a small cluster of apes, Tana, Roki, and 2 young males who often followed him like younger brothers. He groomed them, shared food, even defended one when a territorial scuffle broke out with another troop. The keepers began calling him the Elder, not because of his age, but because of his presence. He still moved slower than others. His muscles, once atrophied by stillness, would never fully catch up. But in his movements was a deep grace, a thoughtfulness, as if each step reminded him of what it cost to earn them. And there was one more change, one that surprised everyone. Rimbo began building nests high in the canopy, not just one, many. Some days he'd build 2 or 3. He'd spend hours arranging branches, patting the edges, adjusting the layout. At first, staff believed it was nesting practice, but a behaviorist saw something deeper. "He's not just nesting," she said. "He's leaving invitations. A place for someone to rest, to feel safe, to belong." A decade spent without shelter had taught Rimbo the value of making space. And he made it, not just for himself, but for others. Leah's documentary, Behind the Glass, premiered the following spring. It wasn't just about Rimbo, it was about captivity in plain sight, about the spaces we walk through, oblivious to what's trapped beside us. It was raw, unpolished, and honest. Audiences left theaters shaken and changed. The final scene was simple. Rimbo perched on a wide branch, gazing across the sanctuary as sunlight broke through the trees. The camera lingered as he slowly turned toward the lens, blinked, and looked up. Not at anything in particular. Just up, toward the sky, toward possibility. And then he climbed, higher than he ever had. Into the thick crown of a fig tree, his silhouette framed against the gold of a dying sun. No narration, no music, just the wind. Because sometimes freedom doesn't need a voice. It just needs to be seen. If Rimbo's story moved you, do something. Speak up. Look closer. Don't assume silence means safety. Somewhere right now, another life sits behind glass, waiting to be seen, waiting to be free. Be the reason they get their second chance. Subscribe for real animal stories that restore faith, ignite change, and remind us what it means to be wild at heart. Like this video if Rimbo's journey inspired you. Share this story to open someone else's eyes. Comment below. What would you say to Rimbo if you had the chance?